Hello and welcome to MEELive. Join us as together we take another look at the stories that are shaping our world.
We are broadcasting live to YouTube and X from Middle East Eye's headquarters here in London.
I'm Mohammed Hassan.
And I'm Matilda Manson. Today is Thursday, the 19th of June. Mohammed, tell us what we've got coming up first on today's show.
Well, I don't know about you, but I have been spending every waking moment outside of work constantly, obsessively checking the news, checking Twitter, checking the live streams, just to try and get a grasp of the rapidly unfolding and escalating war between Israel and Iran. What exactly is happening? We have been trying to cover as much of it as possible, and today we are looking at the Israeli perspective. Of course, they're the ones that kickstarted this war. The aims of the war have continued to evolve. Today we heard that the Ayatollah Khomeini himself might now be a target officially by the Israeli defense minister. So we are going to be joined by an Israeli defense intelligence analyst, somebody who actually used to work inside Israeli intelligence, to tell us what exactly Israel is thinking, how are they achieving their military aims, and what could possibly bring an end to this war.
Should be a really interesting perspective. But while, of course, attention is turning to the escalating regional conflict, the war on Gaza continues. And we will be spotlighting what is happening on the ground with the help of someone who's really, really trying to keep attention focused on events. Dr. Mohammed Mustafa is a voluntary doctor from UK, Australia. The last time we spoke to him on this show, he was tuning in from a hospital in Gaza. Today he's joining us here in the studio.
Now, of course, this morning, some people may have seen that attack, Iranian attack on a hospital facility in Beersheba, Israel. We saw very strong words of condemnation from the Israeli government saying that hospitals are a red line. But of course, as people would know, Israel itself has been accused multiple times of targeting hospitals in Gaza.
There's been fierce condemnation from the Israeli government about this attack. Iran has said that they are targeting a military facility near the hospital. Of course, Israel has said the same when Gaza hospitals have been hit in attacks. They've been saying that they've been targeting Hamas operatives. Something that's really interesting about Israel's reaction is they are opening a press office in the hospital to, in their words, show the world what a targeted civilian attack looks like. Now, I suspect Dr. Mustafa will say that we already know what civilian attacks on hospitals look like, but I'll be sure to put it to him.
He was there right on the ground in the heart of all of it.
Let's start with the headlines.
6 days into Israel and Iran's war, the world is waiting to see if US President Donald Trump will officially get involved. But the president is keeping them guessing. When asked whether he will join Israel in striking Iranian nuclear facilities, Trump's response appeared deliberately ambiguous.
I may do it, I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do. I can tell you this, that Iran's got a lot of trouble, and they want to negotiate. And I said, why didn't you negotiate with me before? All this death and destruction, why didn't you negotiate? I said to the people, why didn't you negotiate with me 2 weeks ago? You could have done fine. You would have had a country. It's very sad to watch this.
Despite calling the conflict sad, the president laughed during reporters' questioning and insisted that no one knows what he will do. He's also repeatedly said his main stance is that Iran should not have nuclear weapons and accused Iran of dragging on nuclear negotiations, despite being the one to tear up an existing deal with Iran in 2018 during his first term as president. He has reportedly approved a plan to attack Iran but not yet decided to initiate it. European foreign ministers are set to hold emergency nuclear talks with Iran's foreign minister on Friday in Geneva in a bid to de-escalate the fighting through diplomacy. Meanwhile, the UK's Attorney General has warned against UK military involvement and questioned the legality of Israel's attacks on Iran. But British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who is also a former human rights lawyer, sidestepped questioning about the legality of Israel's actions.
Its actions in Iran is acting within international law?
Well, look, it's a fast-moving situation. I've been absolutely clear that we're against the Iranian nuclear programme, been absolutely clear that Israel has the right to self-defence, and I discussed the security and safety of Israel when I spoke to Prime Minister Netanyahu just the other day.
But no one knows better.
But I've been clear, my absolute focus has always been and remains that we have to de-escalate the situation.
And
that this has to be done by negotiation.
Sticking up two fingers to that in everything he's said since he left the room.
I don't accept that. I'm not going to stand here and look at interpretations of other people's words. But
the whole world seems to be on edge about this.
I know from being in the room with him as we discussed it what is absolutely clear from the G7 statement.
But on the legality issue, on Israel's actions and potentially America's, if you're wrong and they follow in and join in, you think that Israel is under actual or imminent threat from Iran?
Well,
otherwise you presumably would say they weren't acting.
This is a
inside international law,
complicated situation. I'm absolutely clear in my mind that we need to de-escalate, and that's what I'm absolutely focused on.
But are they within international law?
As I've been in all the discussions here, in all of my comments
it's reasonable
about
to ask
this,
you that,
and is there in the G7.
It's reasonable to ask you. You were an opponent of the Iraq War, 2003. You wrote about it very powerfully, saying that just because some other country might be an unspecified type of threat in the future doesn't give you the right to attack them.
Well, in the middle of a fast-moving conflict, where my focus is on resolution, I'm afraid my focus is going to remain on de-escalation of the situation.
Iran fired a wave of missiles at Israel this morning, hitting one of the largest hospitals in the southern city of Beersheba. The strikes caused extensive damage to several buildings and injured at least 240 people. Israeli attacks across Iran also continued, targeting civilian and residential areas as well as nuclear facilities. At least 639 Iranians have died in Israeli attacks, and over 1,300 have been injured. 24 Israelis have been killed by Iranian attacks, and many have fled their homes, with footage showing people sheltering in underground car parks. Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz visited the site of the bombed hospital today, where he told reporters that killing Iran's supreme leader was now part of Israel's war plans.
אני רוצה לומר שדיקטטור כמו חמינאי שעומד בראש מדינה כמו איראן וחרת על דגלו את השמדת מדינת ישראל, את המטרה הנוראית הזאת של השמדת ישראל, הוא לא יכול להמשיך ולהתקיים.
In Gaza, Israeli forces continue to attack and kill Palestinians seeking aid at distribution sites. This morning, civil defense teams retrieved the bodies of 15 Palestinians killed while queuing for aid in northwest Gaza. The death toll outside aid distribution points has reached close to 400 in just the last month. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, in the shadow of war on Iran, Israeli authorities have completely blocked entry to Al-Aqsa Mosque over the past week. Restrictions were partially lifted this morning, but Israeli police continue limiting who can enter the grounds. Some Palestinians fear Israel is using the crisis to change the status quo of the holy site. Israeli forces have also been conducting raids and demolitions across the occupied West Bank, wounding several Palestinians since dawn.
On Wednesday, a member of the Irish rap group MEE was granted bail on a UK terror charge over raising a Hezbollah flag at a concert. Liam Og Ohana, also known by his stage name Mokara, appeared before Westminster Magistrates Court after being charged in May. Under UK law, Hezbollah is a proscribed terrorist organisation, meaning expressing support for the group is illegal. Hundreds gathered outside the court in central London to demonstrate in support of the rapper. NECAP have said they deny this offence and pledge to vehemently defend their member. This is political policing, they said on Instagram. This is a carnival of distraction. We are not the story. Genocide is.
This is MEE's Live's Deep Dive, where we dive into a story shaking up the world. Now here's a question. How long has Israel been planning its all-out attack on Iran? What will it consider a success? Is it destroying Iran's deeply bunkered Fordo facility, or is the aim now to go after the Ayatollah himself? I spoke to Danny Sitrinovitz, a former Israeli defense intelligence officer who spent years as the head of the Iran branch in the Research and Analysis Division. He's now a fellow at Israel's Institute of National Security Studies. Danny Sitrinovitz, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for being here with us.
No, thank you for having me.
I want to start by asking you what your military assessment of how the war is going for Israel so far.
First, we have to say that we have to be very cautious in assessing an event that is unprecedented. Definitely, Israel has major achievements regarding its ability to deprive Iran from nuclear capabilities, degrading its missile capabilities, and of course decapitating the senior military leadership. So definitely those achievements are massive. But on the other hand, we have to remember that Iran is still launching missiles against the state of Israel. And we are maybe on our way to attrition war that I don't think that Israel is able to win. And maybe it's even eroding its major achievements, as I mentioned. So I think that we have to be very cautious. For now, it seems that Israel has the upper hand, but the Iranians still have the capability to launch missiles against the state of Israel. And I don't think that Israel, if it means really to topple the regime, has the capability to do so. So definitely, it's something that we have to take good care and looking at. But even more importantly, in terms of the nuclear side, definitely the fact that Israel cannot destroy Fordo enrichment site, this is another thing that we have to remember that goes against Israel. Because despite of the achievement that I already mentioned in the nuclear side, without destroying Fordo, definitely Israel faces an alarming possibility that Iran will cross the threshold to 90% enrichment, meaning military grade, even after all the achievement that we had. So we have to be very cautious. Israel has great achievements, but we have to see how things will develop towards the end of the campaign.
As you mentioned, it is a very unprecedented situation, and things are fast moving and evolving. And part of what's evolving seems to be the war aims, the stated war aims of the Israeli government itself. What do you think would consider success in this situation that would convince Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to end the war?
I think you're touching a very important question, because we have to remember that Israel went to this war for two main reasons. This is what we declared. This is what the Israeli government declared. We want to limit or will destroy the Iranian nuclear capability, and to do the same thing regarding its missile capability. Now, we all know that we cannot destroy the last missile or destroy Fordo for now until the American, if the when will enter. So definitely we have problems in achieving those targets. But I think even more importantly, Israel adopting a new target, talking about killing Khamenei and toppling the regime. So I think Israel is actually moving for the declared statement regarding the goal of the war, the formal one, to a non-formal but now very clear target of the toppling the regime. The main problem here that Israel doesn't have the ability to really topple the regime only by air superiority. It has to have the American by the side. So without Americans getting in and helping Israel in that, actually, I'm not sure that even if the Americans will topple the regime, they will topple the regime. But I think that the problem is that Israel could find itself in a situation that it has major operational achievement in the first days of the war, but it won't achieve not the clandestine and not the overt targets of the war. So definitely we have to take a closer look what's going on now, but I think that Israel is moving towards toppling the regime.
And we heard that from the defense minister, Israel Katz, this morning. He said that eliminating Khamenei was now a war aim. And you have been very vocally critical of that. You've also been studying Iran for a long time. Why do you think would happen in this situation, in the power vacuum of taking such a move?
Well, I think first you have to remember it's not in the war targets, and the Israeli society is suffering after the government promised them that it will do, like I mentioned, they will cripple the Iranian nuclear and missile capabilities. Nobody talked about toppling the regime. And this is a real threat, because first for Israel, I'm not sure we're able to do so. If we'll try to do so and won't achieve this goal, then we're entering a war of attrition, especially if the Iranians will continue launching missiles against us. So I'm not sure we're able to reach that. But definitely we have to remember Israel is deviating from its long history policy of not killing leaders. And I'm not sure that even if we kill Khamenei, things will be better. I mean, instead of because of the fact that we don't know what will happen after. Sometimes you prefer with the devil that you know, the devil that you don't know. We can find RGC controlling Iran. We can find Iran suddenly transforming like a puzzle to million pieces, and with a country that actually has nuclear capabilities. We find multiple countries in front of us, multiple minorities. And maybe things actually will be more escalatory, because if Israel will kill Khamenei, it will find all the Shia world in Iraq, in Lebanon, against it. So I'm not sure that we really think that hard in terms of that. I think that we have major achievements. We want to capitalize on those achievements, but I'm thinking that killing Khamenei is one bridge too far.
You have spent a long time working in Israeli intelligence, and a big part of your focus was specifically Iran. And there, if anybody's been paying attention, it's no surprise that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu specifically has long wanted this conflict, this confrontation with Iran to happen. He's been wanting to bomb Iran, at least saying so publicly, for more than 30 years. When we're talking about this kind of scale of a conflict between Israel and Iran, how long has this attack been in the works? How long has it been studied? How much of a carefully mapped out strategy, what is this?
Well, definitely you're not preparing this attack, not in a day, not in a week, and not in a month. The thing that Israel did in the opening attack, in the first stages of the war, was something that you prepare for years. The Mossad activity on the ground, the Air Force activity from the air, simultaneously working to decapitating the senior leadership of Iran. This is something that will take a long, long time to prepare. Now, I don't know when Netanyahu decided to operate that, but I'm sure President Trump has a significant role in that. Because if Netanyahu would have get a green light from Trump to attack, Israel wouldn't attack. Now, definitely we see now that the Americans are not attacking with us, they're defending the state of Israel. But I think that first and foremost, even though the Americans are not attacking right now in Iran, Israel couldn't go to this attack without U.S. approval. This is why I think that it was a making for years, but it just waited until President Trump was elected. Netanyahu felt it has some sort of a golden moment in terms of approval of the U.S., the weakness of Hezbollah, the weakness of Iran, and of course the information coming out in the nuclear side, weaponization activity of the scientists, and everything was aligned. All the stars were aligned, and he decided to initiate the strike.
Now, what we heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu last week when he launched that attack was that he had intelligence proving that Iran was weeks, even months away from a nuclear weapon. This is contradicting what the US's own intelligence body has been telling them. It also contradicts what the IAEA, the International Atomic Agency, has been saying publicly. Its cynical read on the situation would say that Israel is just using this as a cover of an imminent threat to justify a war that, as you pointed out, has long been in the waiting.
Well, it's a good question because we don't know. We didn't see the information. We didn't see the intel, so we don't know what was in the intel. I think it's safe to say a couple of things. First, I don't think even that Israel claimed that Khamenei ordered to build a bomb. I think even when in the briefing that the intel elements are giving to journalists in Israel, they're saying that the scientists worked for the case of they will be requested to build a bomb. So I think I think there is an understanding that Khamenei didn't order to build a bomb as fast as he can. I think what really happened is that we had scientists that actually returned back to the material of the Hamas project that closed in 2003 when Iran really tried to build a bomb. They did something. I don't know how much it shortened the time. I think it's the main debate. The core debate is how much it shortened the time for weapons if and when Khamenei would have ordered them to build it. We don't know, but I think this is the heart of the discussion. But because we don't have the information, we don't have the material, we don't know what really happened behind closed doors, it's very hard for me to assess if Netanyahu talked in a way that there was some sort of concrete information about it or assessment. We all know that the intel information built from information, but also from assessment on the information. Maybe the Israel assessed more harshly the information that we had or US had, and the US actually assessed that in more relaxed way, thinking that there is no dramatic change regarding the Iranian nuclear strategy. So the bottom line of things, until we won't see the information itself, we won't know. But I think the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Now, a number of analysts have said that this attack on Iran's facilities and the derailment of nuclear talks with the United States is only going to embolden Iran's resolve to develop a nuclear weapon. If nothing else, then just to create a permanent deterrent against attack. They've already signaled that they might withdraw from the non-proliferation treaty in protest. Do you think that we're now barreling towards that trajectory, that even if it wasn't happening before, that now it's almost a certainty that Iran will consider this option?
Well, definitely we cannot rule it out. We have to say that. This is why I'm saying, well, let's wait with the assessment until the end of the war. Because assuming that, take for example, we don't know what's going on today in Fordo, right? We have our assessment, but with no inspection regime. Maybe the Iranians that have already the enriched uranium now enriching to 90%, they will hide this material. They have it for use in the future, on the long run. We don't know. This is why when you're attacking a country that we're on the verge of enriching to 90%, you're taking a huge risk, a huge gamble. This is why you have to take care of Fordo. So I think that was a major risk that Israel took when it launched the war. And it also goes to the fact that we cannot assess what will be the end because of the fact that we don't know what will happen with Fordo, we don't know what will happen with the spectral beam. I think that regardless of that, we have to have political solution in the end that will assure the fact that the IAEA will continue inspect the sites whenever or wherever they will decide whether to leave the enrichment on Iranian soil or not. It's important. Israel cannot use only the force of the F-35 of the F-15 in order to make sure that Iran won't return back to build this bomb. And like you said, it has the capability because the Iranian nuclear program is indigenous one, meaning that the Iranian knows everything from the mining to the enriching of uranium to 90%. This is why, despite all the achievement that Israel had, we have to have an inspection regime, we have to have political solution that will pave the way to understanding that Iran cannot develop a nuclear bomb. I'm afraid that we believe that our achievements this far were enough, but I think that they are not enough without taking care of Fordo, without building, again, inspection regime that will prevent Iran from reaching a bomb.
And let's look at the reverberations outwards as a consequence of this. Will this war also not signal other regional powers, Saudi Arabia, Turkey in particular, that they need to have their own nuclear weapons to protect themselves in the future?
Definitely, the risk of Iran having a nuclear bomb is something that was probably on the mind of the Saudis and the Turks when they thought about advancing their nuclear capabilities. But unfortunately, what's happening now in Iran can signal to them that they have to reach a bomb regardless. Because what we see now is actually major achievements by Israel. Maybe the US will participate. And those countries look at that and saying, okay, today maybe we are supporting the US, but we don't know what will happen tomorrow. They understand that maybe the only way to assure that their regime will survive into the future is acquiring a nuclear bomb. This is why I think that what's happening right now is a problematic for the NPT. We have to make sure the NPT will prevail, meaning a political agreement that will limit Iran's ability to develop a nuclear bomb. This also will signal to the Saudis and the Turks at the end of the day, NPT is a good thing. Without doing so, without leaving that only for the use of force, then maybe they will understand that as well. So regardless what will happen at the end of the war, we have to look at the Saudis, the Emiratis, and especially the Turks to see how this war, if it changed the nuclear strategy. I tend to think that definitely regarding the Turks and the Saudis, this war might change or influence of at least revising, rethinking about their policy.
Now, the elephant in the room here, of course, is Israel's undeclared nuclear weapons program. It's estimated to have around 90 nuclear warheads. It's never joined the non-proliferation treaty, and no nuclear inspector has ever been allowed to investigate their facilities. Now, so in speaking about nuclear power in the region, whether it's Iran or other people, does Israel really have a leg to stand on when it comes to nuclear weapons?
Well, it's very hard to know because officially Israel has no policy like that. There are a lot of reports coming back and forth, but Israel never admit that. So it's very hard to relate to something that Israel never admitted. I think that the problem that we have is less the Israeli alleged nuclear power that, again, we don't know exactly if even something like that it has or not.
But it is true.
The problem
It's
is
not
the NPT.
it's not something that's debated by anybody at this point. I mean, Israel has never officially, they've promoted this nuclear ambiguity. But I mean, the former head of the IAEA has called repeatedly for their nuclear facilities to be inspected. There has been more than a dozen UN resolutions that have called on Israel to either give up their nuclear weapons or join the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Of course, there's been leaks famously from some of these underground nuclear weapons facilities. There is plenty of evidence, and most of the world, certainly the region, proceeds as if this is a concrete fact that Israel has nuclear weapons.
Again, as a scientist, I'm not looking as an analyst that's looking at the Middle East. I'm not looking at Israel, so it's very hard for me to assess everything that you mentioned. I have to say something about the NPT side of things. I think that the problem is that a country that not signing the NPT attacking a country that signed the NPT. And why it's so problematic is because of the fact that it's what it signals to other countries regarding the NPT. And I think that, of course, Iran did a lot of trouble with the IAEA, whatever. But I think at the end of the day, you have to remember that the NPT needs to be preserved because it's an important treaty that actually preserved the export of nuclear weapons. And what Israel did is actually, this attack is putting this understanding into some sort of a danger. This is why we have to have a political agreement in the end, hoping that Iran will stay in the NPT itself. I think it's an important element, not only for Iran, but for the future.
And what would a possible political solution? I mean, is this the climate at all right now, given the way that Iran has threatened to respond to any kind of intervention from the United States? We're all, of course, still waiting with bated breath to see what U.S. President Donald Trump will decide to do. The Israelis have been calling on him to enter. It is very important for them that he does enter this war. And once he does, of course, things are going to escalate. You've talked about this before as well. What possible hope is there to find any political or diplomatic solution when you're faced with this kind of crisis?
I think Iran wants a political agreement. The question is not if it wants or Tehran wants, and I think also Trump want that. I think the issue is everything related to what will be the deal and whether Iran will be willing to forgo what we call the right to enrich on its soil. That's, I think, the most important thing that will set the tone whether there's going to be agreement or not. If they can find a solution for that, there will be an agreement. And I think the U.S. will force Israel to stop the war. If not, it will be very hard to reach an agreement, and maybe the possibility of the U.S. joining the war will be increased.
Now, Israel, of course, is relying heavily on assistance from the United States in form of anti-defense systems, missiles resupplies, and intelligence. And while we're still waiting for this decision, which may or may not come, how long do you think Israel can continue without direct U.S. support?
I think it's a problem, especially regarding Fordo. We need the U.S. for Fordo. And I think without the U.S. entering the war, we'll find ourselves in the war of attrition. So it's or the U.S. will intervene and find some sort of political solution with Iran to stop the war, or it's to intervene in a way that will destroy Fordo and maybe help Israel, I don't say topple the regime, maybe undermine the regime. It's a dangerous thing, but I think the most dangerous development for Israel is the U.S. not entering the war, Israel trying to topple the regime. We'll find ourselves in an attrition war that will pay a severe price for it. So I think U.S. decision whether to enter or not enter the war will be crucial for how the developments will happen regarding this campaign.
Now, when it comes to Iran's view of the region and view of the way that it's been treated over the last weeks, specifically, you hear messages coming out of the EU, certainly from the US, maintaining Israel's right to defend itself and blaming Iran for being the instigator of tensions in the region. How do you think they're looking at the situation, knowing that Israel was the one that provoked this war with them? It's the third time over the last year that Prime Minister Netanyahu has attempted to start this war, and now he's been successful at it. When Iran is looking at the calculus and looking at the way the international world, certainly Europe, is responding, what is incentivizing them to come to some sort of diplomatic agreement?
first and foremost, to secure the future of the regime. They feel that they were betrayed by the U.S., but they understand that without a political solution, the U.S. will intervene in the war and put the regime in danger. So for them, it's not the issue of honor. They want to stop the war, and they need to reach an agreement. And understand, in order to do so, they have to talk with the American side and the E3. For them, this is the strategic goal.
That is Danny Citrinovitz, former Israeli intelligence officer and national security analyst. Now, the rapidly escalating war between Israel and Iran is taking a terrible psychological toll on millions of Iranians living abroad who face the prospect of watching their country changing forever. Yesterday, Iranian-American writer and activist Hoda Katibi spoke to the host of MEE's podcast Real Talk, Mohammed Hashim, about why so many Iranians who've publicly opposed the Islamic regime in the past are now rallying around the flag in opposition of Israel's aggression.
Here's what I'd like to kind of unpack with you, because I think obviously with everything that's going on, it's looking very black and white. It's almost like if you're against what the government is doing, the Iranian government, if you're against the Iranian government, then surely you're supporting what Israel is doing right now, because that is weakening them and it's, almost toppling them in a way. And if you're not, or if you are against what Israel is doing right now, then you're somehow a state propagandist, or at the very least supportive of the Iranian government. And this is, I feel like, the black and white narrative that's been taking place in very simplistic Twitter debates online and other kind of platforms. But I've been seeing it quite a bit, at least in the narrative that's being pushed out in these editorials, in these op-eds.
Absolutely. And it's not even just on Twitter debates online. The same day that Israel bombed, again, civilian infrastructure, and journalists, the IRIB, Iran's national media company, and despite our, you can have your reservations about the media company, but you can't bomb journalists, especially when they're live on air. It's absurd. And 2 people were killed from that bombing, including just one staffer who just last week he was just going to his job as an intern or working in the back room at a news company, and now he's killed in Israel's strike on my boss is calling. Yep. Forgot I have a job.
Bringing them on the show.
Probably a good idea. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. And at the same time that Israel is literally taking out infrastructure for Iranian state media, Iran International, a diaspora, right-wing, Pahlavi peddling, Saudi-funded media, quote-unquote media outlet with quote-unquote journalists, hosts Netanyahu himself to speak directly to Iranian people. This is strategic.
What does this tell you? What does this mean? If we can kind of just highlight that.
This is absolutely this is like Netanyahu's, this was my nightmare as a kid. This is Netanyahu's dreams since he was a kid. This is his idea of actual complete regime change in Iran, one that is top down, toppling any sort of democracy, care for women, even though he constantly says Zan Zindagi Azadi, which is just infuriating and makes my ears bleed. He wants to install another puppet regime in Iran, as the United States did in 1953 with a coup, toppling a democratically elected prime minister and installing a puppet king, whose now relatives are in LA, claiming that he still has the right to the throne, this billionaire elderly man who has no connection to reality on the ground and is trying, and with Netanyahu, trying to restore some empire in Iran that the Iranian people have rightfully so toppled again and again. So this is absolutely about more than just.
Do you think he has support on the ground, Hoda? Because each time Israel has some sort of confrontation with Iran over the last few years, we've seen Pahlavi come up on our screens, right? And I think what people don't understand is what is the status of someone like that inside Iran.
Yeah, I mean, let's be real. Iranians are a monolith. There are people who support him. There are people who despise him, as there are every single type of people everywhere in the world. To say that nobody domestically in Iran supports Pahlavi would be dishonest. Now, is starting a war with Iran, not a war, sorry, a unilateral attack on Iran, and having sort of strikes that are killing people and destroying hospitals and civilian infrastructure and putting everybody, all of these Iranians, in a state of panic and fear and terror. If for a moment anybody thinks that that actually creates a condition for a democratic people's movement uprising, for people in Iran to feel safe, open, and that they can rise up against their government and install something in their name and something that they love that represents them, is absurd. People are trying to survive right now. And if anything, this is a rally around the flag moment. And this is why the right wing in every single country, including Netanyahu, relies on war in order to consolidate power. It's also happening in Iran right now. With every sanction that's added on Iran, every sort of existential threat literally crumbles the ability for people in Iran to be able to actually rise up and commit themselves to some sort of ground up shift in the status quo, in a people's revolution. And what is ironic is that so many people who, including myself, who are vehemently against the Iranian government, everybody who I know in Iran, in this moment are also putting out statements and talking about, we need to end the war. Like, who's going to rise up if Iranians are killed? Who's left? Pahlavi wants to come and rule over rubble? Like, what's the outcome of this?
Here's what I'd like to kind of unpack with you, because I think obviously with everything that's going on, it's looking very black and white. It's almost like if you're against what the government is doing, the Iranian government, if you're against the Iranian government, then surely you're supporting what Israel is doing right now, because that is weakening them and it's, almost toppling them in a way. And if you're not, or if you are against what Israel is doing right now, then you're somehow a state propagandist, or at the very least supportive of the Iranian government. And this is, I feel like, the black and white.
That was Iranian-American writer Hoda Katibi speaking to Real Talk, and you can catch the full interview tomorrow on our YouTube channel and on all podcast platforms. Stay with us now as we turn our focus to the ongoing targeting of Palestinians queuing for aid in Gaza. As global attention shifts to the escalating conflict between Israel and Iran, the Gaza Strip is burning from another day of strikes, and dozens have been shot by occupying forces. Israel began the 621st day of its war with airstrikes on the Al-Shati displacement camp in the north of Gaza and in residential areas of Gaza City. At least 75 Palestinians have been killed since dawn. The official death toll is increasing daily, standing at least 55,706, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. A further 130,000 are wounded. And gunfire attacks at food distributions now appear to be daily, with 15 of those killed today shot by Israeli military while waiting for aid. 397 aid seekers have been killed and over 3,000 wounded in this way since late May, when Israel launched its militarized aid plan backed by US mercenaries but condemned by the UN. Today, we are joined by a first responder to these attacks. When Middle East Eye first spoke to today's guest, he called in remotely from Al Ahli Hospital in Gaza City, weeks after Israel unilaterally broke the ceasefire. He left days before they bombed it. Dr. Mohammed Mustafa is an Australian-British doctor who has made multiple voluntary missions to Gaza, also working in the NASA and European hospitals at different periods of the war. Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, thank you for joining us in the studio.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the last time we spoke, it felt like Gaza's healthcare system was already at breaking point.
Yeah.
You were working with equipment that was unfit for purpose.
Yeah.
But since you left, Israel has launched its most expansive offensive in Gaza. It's begun systematically open firing at aid distributions, and it bombed the hospital at which you were working.
Yeah.
How is this healthcare system still standing, and in what state?
Well, it's not a healthcare system. And I think, when we call it a healthcare system, it's probably misleading. What it is it's tents it's broken buildings, there is no medicine, there's barely any anesthetic available. There's also a lack of specialists as well in Gaza, because there's not even just the destruction of the healthcare system, but there's also a blockade of medicine, there's a blockade of doctors that are going in. So, you know, to call it a healthcare system I think is misleading. I think we should just be calling it first aid at this stage, because that's generally all it is. You know, we patch people up, we can keep them alive maybe for a few hours, but if the surgeons aren't there and the operating theatres aren't there and the anaesthetic isn't there, then those people just essentially are waiting to die.
And what do you do as a medic when those people arrive?
You know, in a mass casualty event, because I work in the emergency department, when you have a mass casualty event, you know, you have to pick and choose who you're going to help and who's left on the floor. And, you know, you don't always get to everybody. So people are dying while they're waiting to be seen. And, you know, there's not even an infrastructure for roads for ambulances to get there. And because of the fuel blockage as well, people are actually bringing in the wounded, either carrying them, and then we've seen images of that, or they're bringing them in on the back of donkey carts. But again, you know, when you're wounded, time is critical. So a lot of these people actually die being carried in or being brought into the hospital. And then those that arrive in the hospital, you know, they still have to wait for hours as well because of the lack of equipment and the lack of doctors. So, you know, we lose so many patients that we don't need to lose. And that's just from attacks. Then we've got, you know, patients with chronic diseases that haven't had any medication, haven't had their insulin, haven't had their heart medications, and they're also dying as well. You know, half of Gaza's dialysis population has died since the start of this war because of lack of facilities for dialysis.
How do you even begin to prepare to make that decision? I mean, what trains you to make that call when you are trained not in a war zone, and generally you're not having to make such life-altering decisions, you know, in the waiting room?
Yeah.
How do you handle that?
Do you know, I've spoken with a lot of doctors that have been there as well, and, you know, we've tried to help each other and help each other understand, you know, what we saw and how we coped with it. It's almost impossible to really justify any decision that you make. You know, because of a lack of triage, you don't know the severity of injuries. You might pick somebody up that has a very poor chance of survival, and while you're working on that person, someone who actually had a good chance of survival might die because you didn't get to them sooner. And that's unfortunately another tragedy of the war as well, is that, you know, people are dying because of the decisions that we make as medics, and that's something that all those doctors that go there to Gaza have to live with.
Now, something that we saw in Israel this morning was an attack by Iran on an Israeli hospital, the Saraka hospital. And Israel's response to this was unequivocally damning. Defense Minister Israel Katz said that the supreme leader, and I quote, can not be allowed to exist anymore as a result of what Israel is calling a targeted attack on civilians. And they've actually opened a government-run press office in the hospital in order to, in their words, show international media what targeted civilian attacks look like. You have worked in hospitals under Israeli bombardment where journalists, international journalists, are not allowed. How does this make you feel?
I actually think it's great that they are making a big deal about this. I mean, first of all, it's illegal to bomb hospitals, and the fact that they know it's illegal, I think, just will count against them when, you know, one day this is all brought into the International Criminal Court of Justice. Because if there is no justification, even if you have a military base in a hospital, even if soldiers are being treated in the hospital, if that's not legitimate targets, which it's not under international law, but if you know that's not legitimate targets and you've been targeting hospitals, it's pretty damning, it's pretty self-damning, to be honest. So I actually think this this news that's coming out about the bombing of the hospital and the condemnation worldwide, I actually think that's going to come back full circle, and I think everyone's going to realize that actually international law is in there for a reason. And if now we are all up in arms about Israeli hospitals being bombed, it's only going to show the hypocrisy of the amount of hospitals in Gaza that have been bombed, because they've not just been bombed, they've been systematically destroyed. I've been there in those hospitals. I've been there to the dialysis units. I've been there in the ultrasound machines that have been cut and snipped, the probes, so they can't be used. We've had CT scanners that have had their batteries removed so they can't be used. So, you know, sometimes it's not even just the destruction, it's the coordinated destruction of equipment to render it useless. So this goes on quite often in Gaza. And I want more noise to be made about bombings of hospital, because the more noise that's made, ultimately, the more people are beginning to realize at how atrocious it is to bomb hospitals.
Because Israel would justify its bombings of hospitals where this has occurred by saying that Hamas is using these facilities as fronts for military operations.
Yes.
But the apparent sabotage of hospital equipment, if you believe that to have been done by state agents, it seems hard to defend that on those grounds.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's videos of it. There's videos of IDF soldiers destroying these machines. I think at the end of the day, what we've all seen and witnessed as doctors in Gaza, not just the targeting of the hospitals, but also the targeting of healthcare workers as well, because that's the other part of it. It's not just targeting of the hospital and destroying the functionality of the hospital, it's the people that can work in the hospital as well that have also been targeted. So, this is, I want more noise to be made about this. I want this to be front and center news that hospitals have been targeted, because the more this is front and center news, the more the whole world can see the comparison of what selective outrage looks like.
So, speaking of noise, there's been no word of Gaza on today's front pages, here at least, but Israel has been on many of them. You are desperately trying to keep attention focused on the war in Gaza, which has not relented. Do you worry that this regional escalation could distract focus?
So, look, it's not going to distract focus from the people that have always been focused on Gaza. It's going to distract focus from mainstream media, but, the mainstream media has never been good at reporting for Gaza. So I don't think people should lose hope if we don't see Gaza in the mainstream media, because the Gaza story and the reports that we've had have always been from individual media, private media, and I think as long as that keeps going and as long as people keep talking about it, it'll eventually come back into the mainstream media. And I think right now it's very important that we keep going and keep reporting on Gaza. Even if you have a platform, keep focused on Gaza, let the others report about the other news.
Now, Dr. Mustafa, it's been some months, I think, since you last left Gaza. Is there a memory that has remained strongest for you?
I think some of the most amazing things about Gaza is the people of Gaza. When you go over there and their generosity. I think one thing that really resonated with me was when outside of the hospital, about 50 meters, so it was on the grounds of the hospital, was bombed. And, that was probably the closest I'd been at that point to a missile. And I remember just panicking and holding onto the walls because the roof tiles were falling in. And I thought, the hospital had been hit and potentially more missiles was going to happen. And a child, a young lad just grabbed my hand and he said, in Arabic, he said, Inta kwayisi, doctor, are you okay, doctor? And I remember thinking to myself, I'm this big, huge man and I was worried about this. And this child was holding my hand and comforting me, because he knew that I was a foreigner and I wasn't used to this. And I think that just speaks volumes about them, that even the children, despite everything that they've been through in Gaza, that they still had the humility and the grace to put themselves in my shoes and see how I was worried. So that was one thing that really stuck out to me when I was there in Gaza.
I suppose that, the flip side of that story is that, also the children are used to this. And this is something that you saw a lot of, was children in unimaginable, not just pain, but also grief from losing their family members, feeling helpless at times. Was there ever a moment where you just felt like you couldn't go on?
I remember when I did my first interview with you, and I think I was crying, and I was overcome with emotions. I don't know if you can see, but I've got like grey hairs on my beard. I've never had grey hairs before, but when I went to Gaza, I came out, I started losing my hair, I started having grey hair. Children, we would see young children, 9 years old with grey hair. The trauma in Gaza, the mental trauma, the psychological trauma of these children is unbelievable. And, I'm a well-adapted adult, and if I came out struggling after Gaza, I can't imagine what it must be like for those children. It's not a walk in the park when you go and work in Gaza. You really are putting your life at risk. And I take my hat off to anyone that's been to Gaza during this war and has been helping. It's not just doctors and nurses, it's UN coordinators, it's, Save the Children, all of these people. Everyone puts their lives at risk when they're there. But, we get a little bit more safety than those children. But, I've seen kids who, during a mass casualty event, have come in holding their young sibling, because their entire family was dead, and they've walked at night with the drones overhead and the bombings carrying their injured sibling. I always think to myself, what does that do to a child? And I, would remember when we'd have these mass casualty events and you would have, a family brought in and a mother bleeding out to death on the floor, and next to her is her child. And that child is watching their mother die in front of them and is covered in their own mother's blood as their mother dies. These are things that really permeated with me when I was there. And I always think back to the child, and I just think, how do you move forward as a child if you're sat there and watching your own mother die on the floor, and the screams and the chaos, and you're looking around and you're seeing other children dying as well, all in front of you, and the bombs going off. I mean, if it's scary for me as an adult, if I'm turning grey, what's this young child who's just lost their whole family? What is that for them? So, look, the catastrophe that is Gaza is not something that, even if the bombs stop today, there's going to be generations of rebuilding that needs to be done. This is a severely traumatized population. And, you like I said, that child that comforted me, they comforted me because they're so used to the bombings. No one should be used to bombings like that. Sometimes I would panic when you could hear the F-16s and the F-35s overhead. And, the children, some of the children on the ward would tell me, they go, don't worry, that's leaving, that's flying away. And they could tell the difference when a jet was flying to bomb and a jet was flying away after it dropped its load. And I just thought to myself, like, this population, no civilian population knows this, but right down to a 5-year-old child knows the noise a fighter jet makes after it's dropped its load, so it knows when it's safe. So, these are the stories that are in Gaza, and these are the things that you see in Gaza that, not only change you, but, the people that have to go through this. And sometimes, these people, they might lose their mother at the start of the war, then they have to watch their father, then they have to watch their other sibling, then they watch their auntie get killed. It's constant re-traumatizing. There's no such thing as post-traumatic stress disorder in Gaza. It's just constant trauma. You don't have a period to have a post-traumatic stress disorder.
But, and forgive me, but you did get to leave, and it must be weird that sort of knowing you can leave essentially at will when your colleagues and your friends are trapped there.
That night, the day that you leave, is one of the most difficult days. And, when you embrace the doctors and the children and the patients as you're leaving. And I remember, I remember when we got evacuated from the north to the south while I was there, when I was at the Baptist hospital. And, when they found out that we were being evacuated, there was panic at the hospital because they don't evacuate the international doctors for no reason. So everyone was worried the hospital would be targeted. And lo and behold, 2 weeks later, it was bombed. So there obviously was some serious intel that it was going to be bombed. And, I remember the security guard for the hospital, and he was only a 19-year-old boy, and he was working security, and he came up to me and he hugged me and he started crying and he said, please, doctor, don't forget about us. And, the doctors that were there, I think there was a few of us that, were just in tears because we didn't want to leave. We didn't want to leave them because we knew, essentially, we were the human shields for the hospital, that now that we're gone, this hospital might be bombed. And lo and behold, when we left, not long after, the hospital was bombed. So,
do you think it would have not been bombed if you'd stayed?
I mean, look, I think there was a couple of international doctors that were there when it was bombed, so it probably still would have been bombed, but, maybe they would have given more warning time for those patients. We had, there was a child that died because their oxygen cylinder ran out of oxygen as they were trying to wheel him out of the emergency department before it was bombed. So, maybe we could have saved that life if we were there. It's hard to know. You go through this a lot. You question yourself a lot.
Now, Dr. Mustafa, you are treading in quite difficult territory, doing what you're doing, paying witness to these incidents in Gaza. Because not only is the Israeli government flatly denying targeting civilians, they are also brandishing anyone attempting to show evidence of this from inside Gaza as liars and essentially operatives for Hamas. How often are you called a Hamas propagandist?
Well, look, to me, it's just noise. What matters is the truth. What matters is those children's lives. What matters is the people of Gaza. And no matter, what people call me, I know I'm on the right side of history. And I have a lot of other doctors that are saying the same thing that I'm saying. I have a lot of international organizations saying the same thing that I'm saying. So, people can call me what they like, but one thing they can't call me is a liar.
I can tell you, though, it makes it difficult sometimes credibly reporting on what's happening in Gaza when even something as basic as death toll figures are called into question because of their association with Hamas-led administration.
Yeah.
Maybe you can help us just to understand these processes a little bit. How are deaths registered at hospitals in Gaza, and how reliable are these figures?
Well, you've got to remember, in the hospital, there's not just international doctors that are working there. There's also loads of international agencies that are all in the hospital. You've got reporters that are there as well, and you've got, things like the Red Cross, UNICEF. They're all in the hospital. So, and also as well, there's a very strict way of counting the numbers of dead. That figure of 55,000, you're seeing images of hundreds of people dying a day, but the figure doesn't rise very quickly. And the reason is because the counting system is almost destroyed in Gaza. So that just shows you how accurate the counting is.
So do you think it's more likely to be an underestimate?
Oh, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if we were close to 200,000 at this stage. I mean, the Lancet report was pretty clear. And like I told you, half of Gaza's dialysis population is dead. When we're talking about direct and indirect deaths of the war are two different things. And also as well, there's thousands trapped under the rubble, And when you think about that 80% of the homes are destroyed or damaged in Gaza, how many of those have people that are trapped underneath? So, when we get larger lifting equipment, that death toll will rise quite rapidly. And also as well, most people, or a lot of people, they don't bring in their dead to the hospital. It's too dangerous to go to the hospital when there's a bombing campaign going on. So sometimes people just bury them outside on the street there and then, and they don't feel like we need to bring our dead relative to the hospital to be counted. We just need to bury them and get on with, with surviving. And also it costs money to transport somebody to hospital. You need to get on the back of a donkey, you need to get into a car, there's no fuel, price is really high. So, if you've got dead relatives, sometimes people just bury them on the side of the road. So those bodies don't get counted either. How many mass graves have we found with hundreds and dozens of bodies in there? So the death toll in Gaza is astronomically higher. And therefore, when people talk about the counting process, I'm saying even just put the counting process to one side. Just the other dead that haven't even been registered. And also, when you're an international doctor and they bring in these bodies, you have to verify the deaths. It's me and other doctors that verify the deaths. And when we verify the death and we make sure that, we check if this person is alive or dead, then the family come in to identify the body as well. So this is a rigorous process that goes on. So look, it's not even about counting the dead in Gaza. It's about the lack of counting. That's what we should be talking about, is the lack of counting in Gaza, not the overcounting, not the inaccuracies, the fact that most of the dead in Gaza probably haven't been counted yet.
Now, you are planning on returning to Gaza, and not just that, you are seeking support to develop a new children's hospital in the Strip. How would you ensure that this facility, like so many others, isn't accused by the Israeli government of being a cover for Hamas operatives and being targeted and putting patients and staff at risk?
Well, this is a good question. This hospital is going to be a new concept because it's not going to be NGO-led anymore. We want this to be government-led initiatives. And the situation in Gaza is so catastrophic that we have to change the way that we do aid organization. It's either the governments get involved or we're going to keep seeing people funneled into cages and gunned down. So I think the appropriate humanitarian response is that these hospitals that we now bring into Gaza, or these field hospitals, now have to have our own individual government oversight, because the Israeli army doesn't respect the UN, it doesn't respect international law, but it will respect its allies. And one of its allies is Great Britain, one of its allies is Australia. So I am working with many ministers from both sides of the aisles, from both countries, to try and get a united front to bring in a hospital that's going to be an Australian and British and, you know, some other countries that we're hopefully going to work with to bring this hospital in. And what that hospital becomes is it becomes, you know, the British and Australian hospital becomes our property there, and the safety and the security around it will become a task for the governments to make sure that the workers that go in there, which will mostly be international, are all screened. We'll make sure that the ground that it's laid on, there's no tunnels underneath or anything like that. And we also then from that hospital have a secure line of supply of resources, medicine, food and shelter for the patients that we treat. And the patients that we're going to be treating are going to be children because it's going to be a pediatric hospital. So it's a new approach to how we do aid in Gaza and how we do healthcare in Gaza. And I think, you know, if people are so horrified by hospitals being bombed, which they are, and if people are saying that it's a war crime, which it is, then I think then what we need to do is we need to show people that we mean what we say when we say that it's a war crime to bomb a hospital, and we need to have our own hospital in there that won't get bombed, you know, for...
I mean, if it is essentially territory of the government, you know, of the states that the governments come from, then I suppose attacking it would be a act of war.
Well, yeah, exactly. So that's what, you know, but it's a children's hospital, you know, the Israelis are very horrified by, you know, people attacking hospitals, rightly so. And, you know, if they don't respect Palestinian hospitals, they'll respect a British hospital and an Australian hospital.
So have you had any indication from any government ministers that they might get behind this?
We've had some positive talks, and, you know, look, we don't want the funding from the government. We're going to get funding on our own for this hospital through registered organisations and charities. We're talking to some big major players that can fund this hospital. The hospital will be built in Gaza and will be driven in, the hospital will be built in Jordan, and it will be driven in on the back of lorries into Gaza, and it'll be assembled like a jigsaw puzzle in there, and it'll be functional after it's driven into Gaza within a week. It's a self-sufficient hospital. It's solar panel powered. It has pharmacies in there, it has pathology labs, it's got state-of-the-art operating theatres, it's got wards, it's medical caravans and that can be assembled, and also as well it'll have its own water system and sewerage work built in, and the compound will be secured. It'll be secured with walls and cement, and it will have security in there. So, and it's a children's hospital. So
certainly an ambitious project.
It's you know what, it's not as ambitious as people think it is, because, you know, the appetite to help the children in Gaza is huge around the world, and all we really need is a initiative to get behind. And, you know, we've got the infrastructure in place in Jordan to build this hospital and to drive it into Gaza. And this can be a semi-permanent structure, better than tents. It can be operated by joint governments. If they're condemning what's going on in Gaza and they feel that the death toll is too high, this is something that governments can do that can show a tangible change and an objective change that we can make to the children in Gaza. So,
now, this is a paediatric hospital you're talking about, but when we spoke before, you told me that most of the patients you were seeing already were children.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask if you'd stayed in touch with any of the children that you met or treated.
Yeah, I do. I stay in touch with a lot of the families that I treated, and I try and support them the best that I can. It's very hard because, you know, some of the children that I treated in Gaza, they had traumatic head injuries, you know, from when the rubble would collapse and it would hit the head. They would have skull fractures and internal brain bleeds, and, you know, some of them have started to talk again, some of them still can't talk, and it's very hard to watch their rehabilitation because there's not any facilities to rehab them. So essentially it's their families trying to rehabilitate their children from brain injuries, from broken limbs where they've had orthopedic procedures with, you know, the wrong equipment. It's very, very difficult to watch the children go through that, and it only drives me to keep going with this children's hospital, because if we get this children's hospital in, we can treat those kids and we can make a difference in those kids' lives.
Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, thank you so much for joining us here at Middle East Eye.
Thank you for having me.
Now, as Dr. Mustafa mentioned, it is not just the casualties and the injuries of airstrikes and military fire that is putting pressure on Gaza's healthcare. Day-to-day needs, sickness, chronic illness, pregnancies, births, these too are suffering under siege. 24 hours ago, the paediatrics and maternity ward at Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis released an urgent message. Dr. Ahmed Al-Farah warned their supply of milk for premature and newborn babies is set to run out due to Israel's ongoing aid blockade 12 hours from now.
Today we are in the neonatal ICU. We are talking about one of the most serious problems in this section, and in pediatric department and in pediatric ICU department, shortage of milk. As we know, the borders is closed since nearly 4 months ago. No milk allowed to come in Gaza. This make a lot of shortage in the milk quantity, either premature formula or Formula 1 or Formula 2 or lactose-free formula or anti-regurgitation formula. So now, as you can see here, we have a premature baby who's depending completely on the artificial milk, on premature formula. Premature formula now zero, the quantity which available in Nasser Medical Complex is nearly zero. So if this neonate didn't receive the quantity of milk that can survive with it, he will get in shutdown of metabolism, he will get an electrolyte imbalance.
And that is all the time that we have for you today. But before we lose you, we would love to hear from you.
Please do send in your thoughts and your questions. You can comment or contact us on social media at Middle East Eye, and you can email MEELive at middleeasteye.net.
Make sure you hit that notification button so you know exactly when we're going live. It happens right here on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 5 p.m. UK time, 12 p.m. Eastern time.
See you then.